Last week, as part of my Star Trek Retro Reviews series of videos, I reviewed one of the most infamous episodes in all of the Star Trek franchise, the first season TNG episode Code of Honor, or as you may know it more informally, that super racist one. It's a rotten episode, for my money, the worst episode of any Star Trek series ever by far, but that doesn't mean it's completely without value. In my episode review, I propose that perhaps we can use Code of Honor as an object lesson, a don't let this happen to you sort of thing. Now, in this video, I'd like to expand on that. First of all, for those of you who haven't watched the episode recently or haven't seen my review of it, Code of Honor is the story of the Enterprise's visit to planet Ligon 2, a world populated exclusively by demeaning racist caricatures from early 20th century Bull Durham tobacco ads, or so it would seem. The Ligonians, all portrayed by black actors, all dressed like extras in an Arabian Nights-themed music video circa 1985, are portrayed as ignorant, superstitious, greedy, treacherous, boastful, tribal, violent, and oh yeah, they're after the white women. Protect the white women! Numerous people involved in the making of the episode have since spoken out against it, said they're embarrassed to have been a part of it. Writers and producers on the show, like Tracy Torme, and cast members, including Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner, and LeVar Burton, have described the episode as racist, which it unquestionably is. But my focus here is not on the episode itself, or its content, I just did that in the retro review, or even on how this episode came to be, though I assume there's a story there. Rather, I want to focus on the mere fact of Code of Honor's existence, and what we can learn from it. Star Trek is one of the most willfully, self-consciously progressive productions in the history of television, and that goes not only for the original series, but for all of the spin-offs to follow it as well. TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, Prodigy. They have all openly, proudly, blatantly promoted tolerance, diversity, inclusion, equality, whatever the current scare phrase being used by conservatives might be. Politically correct, SJW, woke. Star Trek has been, is, and will be that. Progressive politics and social commentary are as inseparable from the premise of Star Trek as warp drives and transporters and technology covered with tiny blinking lights. And actually, they're even more fundamental than that last one. They've toned down the little blinky lights of late. And yet, despite that commitment to progressive principles and social justice being encoded in its DNA, a Star Trek series somehow produced in 1987, one of the most overtly racist installments of mainstream television of its era. It's only natural to wonder how that happened. Again, I'm not interested in looking for the specific answer to that question right now. I'm more interested in the fact that, however it happened, it did happen. Star Trek The Next Generation, the inheritor of the legacy of Star Trek the original series, Star Trek The Next Generation, which at the time was being personally overseen by Gene Roddenberry himself, produced an episode that betrays its own core values so acutely, with such vulgarity, that even watching it today, almost 37 years after it was originally broadcast, it's kind of shocking. Here's something else to consider, though. While Star Trek has never failed to live up to its own ideals so profoundly before or since, Code of Honor is not a unique example. Prior to Code of Honor, one of the more infamous Star Trek episodes in this respect was what turned out to be the final episode of the original series, Turnabout Intruder. The episode isn't racist, but to this day, it's one of the most sexist episodes in the whole franchise. Not only does it imply that Starfleet doesn't allow women to become starship captains, an implication every other Star Trek show has fortunately ignored, the villain, Dr. Janice Lester, a vengeful ex-girlfriend of Captain Kirk who switches bodies with him in an attempt to steal command of the Enterprise, ends the episode being led away crying while Kirk watches sadly and says her life could have been as rich as any woman's. If only she'd been satisfied keeping a woman's place, is the implication there. Earlier in the episode, there's a line from Lester, though spoken by William Shatner, since Lester is possessing Kirk's body at this point. Isn't Star Trek neat? Where she says, "It's better to be dead than to live alone in the body of a woman." Story by Gene Roddenberry for this one, by the way. Sexism was a recurring blind spot for the original series, despite being very progressive in its depiction of women in some ways. The first officer of the Enterprise is a woman in the original pilot episode. Lieutenant Uhura is a near constant presence on the bridge and is always portrayed as being a competent officer and a trusted member of Kirk's team. The series is filled with patronizing depictions of women and distasteful situations involving women. Competent, confident Uhura will sometimes turn to Kirk in the midst of a stressful situation and whisper, "Captain, I'm frightened." I don't remember Scotty ever doing that. Yeoman Rand is assaulted by the evil version of Captain Kirk after the captain is split into two people by the transporter in the episode The Enemy Within. She reports the attack, during which evil Kirk tries to force himself on her sexually, to Spock and Dr. McCoy, Kirk's best friends, which is awkward enough as it is, and also to Kirk himself. The good Kirk, though Rand doesn't know about the transporter split yet, so from her perspective, she's being forced to accuse her attacker in front of his two closest allies. But then, at the end of the episode, after the existence of the two Kirks has been discovered and Kirk has been restored to his one singular self, Spock turns to Yeoman Rand and says to her, "The imposter," meaning the evil Kirk who sexually assaulted her, "had some interesting qualities, wouldn't you say, Yeoman?" Pretty fucked up. Also fucked up, the treatment of the character of Miramani in the episode The Paradise Syndrome. Not only is she a one-dimensional plot device who exists only to serve the story of Kirk, who is unceremoniously killed off at the end when it's time for Kirk to return to the Enterprise, but she's also part of that episode's overall treatment of Native Americans, which isn't as racist as the depiction of the Ligonians in Code of Honor, but still leans heavily on noble savage and white savior tropes. Depictions of women are occasionally not so great in The Next Generation as well. The episode A Matter of Perspective has Commander Riker accused of attempting to rape a woman and then murdering her husband. Riker is cleared of the charges, of course, and we're left with the inescapable conclusion that his accuser, Manua, either made up the attempted rape or hallucinated it, or somehow grossly misinterpreted something innocent Riker did. Whatever the explanation, the assault she reported didn't actually happen. Which isn't a huge problem within the confines of the episode itself. In fact, the episode does a pretty good job of not portraying Manua as a vengeful, lying woman who is inventing a rape allegation out of spite. But in a broader cultural context, it is a problem, since in the early 1990s, when this episode was produced, and even still today, there exists the belief, promoted by conservatives and anti-feminists, that false rape accusations are common when all evidence indicates that they are not. While I'm on this subject, Star Trek Voyager has a false rape allegation episode of its own, Retrospect, where 7 of 9 experiences flashes of repressed memories of an assault at the hands of an alien arms dealer. It turns out, Seven's memories are misleading, and after the man she accuses is killed trying to fend off what he believes to be an attack on him by Voyager, the episode closes on a note of regret over the tragedy of how Seven's false allegations and the doctor's eagerness to believe her and help her destroyed this man's life. Again, on its own merits, it's not that bad, but judged in a larger context, it's fucking gross. Even my most beloved Star Trek series of all, Deep Space Nine, with a cast of regulars and recurring characters that included several awesomely rendered characters, hero and villain, who were women, occasionally ran off the road when it came to depicting women. One of its most infamous episodes is Prophet and Lace, an attempt at a classic cross-dressing farce in which Quark undergoes a temporary sex change operation in order to convince an influential Ferengi businessman to throw his support behind an effort to give Ferengi women more rights. It's not as bad as it could have been, and the fact that it's played for laughs and manages to actually get a few helps it along, but there are some cringe-inducing moments, particularly when Quark is being coached on how to act like a woman, and during the concluding scene when Quark's sex change has been reversed, but his hormones are still out of balance, so he's so emotional, sentimental, crying, needing a hug from Odo. You know how women are. There are many other examples of Star Trek episodes featuring problematic depictions of women or of non-white people or of people with disabilities or of people dealing with serious trauma. The second lead of Star Trek Voyager, Chakotay, is presented as a person of Native American descent, but the elements of his culture that we see more closely resemble old-fashioned Hollywood concepts of indigenous American culture than they do the real thing. This is likely due in large part to the fact that the show hired as its consultant Jamake Highwater, a writer of European descent who had faked Native American ancestry. Probably not the best guy for that job then, huh? In the current production era of the franchise, the first season of Star Trek Discovery includes a subplot involving the character of Ash Tyler, who seems to be experiencing PTSD after being held captive and sexually assaulted by Klingons. Except, gotcha! He's actually a Klingon sleeper agent, and he was just misremembering some things, using psychological trauma stemming from sexual assault as a red herring to deflect suspicion from an upcoming plot twist. Not very classy. Nor is how a subplot about the U.S.'s unjust immigration policy is handled in the second season of Star Trek Picard. Captain Rios is arrested and detained by ICE agents shortly after the team arrives in the 21st century. He's held in an ICE facility. He witnesses brutality and is subjected to some himself. Eventually, he is broken out by his friends, Seven and Raffi. His ICE experience is never mentioned again for the rest of the season, and in fact, despite being unjustly detained and violently abused by government agents enforcing a racist and inhumane border policy, Rios decides he actually loves it in the 21st century and chooses to stay behind when everyone else returns to their own time. So since this is Star Trek and social commentary is kind of its thing, you expect the Rios ICE plot to, go somewhere and say something about this very pressing current issue. But nope, it goes nowhere, it says nothing, and when it's over, it's like it never even happened. And sure, Season 2 of Picard is filled with time-killing narrative dead ends like this, but with subject matter this important, to introduce it and then do nothing with it feels pretty tasteless. Again, I could go on, but you get the point. Star Trek has fucked up a lot over the years, and yet I still like Star Trek. More than that, I still proudly champion Star Trek as a model for how storytellers can and should use their platforms to explore serious issues, to make political statements, to encourage their audiences to think about the world as it is and as it could be, and to examine themselves in the same way. I do that because I believe in general that Star Trek's heart has always been in the right place, that its efforts toward political and social commentary have been done in good faith, and that its occasional fuck-ups, even the truly egregious ones like Code of Honor, have been the result of honest oversights and mistakes on the parts of its creators, or momentary lapses in judgment and or taste, not done out of malice or in a willful attempt to spread an intolerant or otherwise harmful viewpoint. And the whole reason I even bring this up is to tell you, to remind you, and to remind myself, that if Star Trek can fuck up like this, so can you, and so can I. Unconscious bias is a thing. It's real, and we are all susceptible to it. No matter how thoughtful we are, no matter how much we care about equality, no matter how determined we are to always respect people's differences, to lean toward curiosity and away from snap judgments, no matter how hard we try to be open-minded, open-hearted, flexible, sensitive, tolerant, accepting, empathetic people, we are all capable of thinking or speaking or acting in ways that are contrary to all of those things. We're human, we're flawed, we're limited. We can only ever truly experience life through our own eyes. And it's very easy for us to start treating our experience as the default experience. Allowing our unconscious biases to influence our behavior doesn't make us bad people. And this is important, when another person points out something offensive or insensitive or what have you that you've said or done, they aren't necessarily accusing you of being a bad person, especially if this person is your friend or someone you're aligned with politically or ideologically. They're probably just trying to bring something to your attention that you've overlooked on the assumption that you'd want to know so you can start working on making the appropriate adjustments. The instinctive reaction when someone calls you out or calls you in for unintentionally saying or doing something offensive or harmful is to get defensive, to deny that you've done anything wrong, to turn it back around on the person who pointed it out, to treat it like an accusation. Don't do that. Resist that instinct. Be open to the possibility that you're in the wrong, that you're the one who needs to change. And if that is the case, be willing to try to change. That's all most people expect. Not perfection, just an honest effort toward positive change. Because if you put in that kind of effort, eventually that positive change will happen. Star Trek can give us a helpful example to follow there as well. One of the shortcomings of past versions of Star Trek I haven't mentioned yet is the lack of explicit queer representation. There were characters who could be read as queer-coded. There were guest characters who were gay or bisexual or were at least strongly implied to be. But for a show so strongly committed to celebrating the strength and unity that comes from embracing our diversity, Star Trek was notably lacking prominent queer characters. With the current production era, that's all changed. In the movie Star Trek Beyond, the Kelvin timeline version of Sulu is established as being gay with a same-sex partner with whom he has a child, but that's established in a couple of brief shots in one scene early in the film and never really comes up again. Star Trek Discovery, the first of the current era's television and streaming series, has a cast that now includes at least 5 regular or recurring queer characters: Paul Stamets, Hugh Culber, Jet Reno, Adira Tal, and Gray Tal. Following Discovery's lead, queer characters have since appeared in Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks, and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Representing diversity in sexuality and gender identity used to be kind of an unacknowledged third rail in Star Trek, but now it's been fully embraced by the current crop of creators. Star Trek's queer representation hasn't been perfect. Some viewers have had some very valid criticisms, but the point is, the problem has been acknowledged, an effort has been made to address it, and that effort has been mostly successful and well received and is ongoing. If Star Trek can fuck up, so can any of us. And if the creators of Star Trek can acknowledge that they need to do better and then actually do better, so can any of us. Remember, the same franchise that produced Code of Honor also produced Far Beyond the Stars, one of the most powerful anti-racist episodes of any TV series during the 1990s. The same franchise that once implied that commanding a starship was no job for a woman has since given us so many characters who are strong, multifaceted, often commanding women that I'm just going to invite you to leave a comment with your favorite, because if I tried to name them all, it would end up sounding like one of those so-and-so begat so-and-so passages from the Old Testament, and I'd surely forget someone anyway. It's a lot. The most important thing isn't that we sometimes fall short. The most important thing is what we do about it. Do we deny and protest our innocence and insist we shouldn't have to change? Or do we accept the fact that we all have implicit biases and lacks of perception and try to be a better version of ourselves tomorrow than we are today? I know what the Star Trek thing to do is. And I'm glad Star Trek did it. Can you imagine if TNG was just more of this shit? Yikes!